This is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to my shelf of many things, where I take a look at indie and small press tabletop role-playing games and RPG accessories. Now, I've had my eyes on two OSR-inspired sci-fi RPGs to review for some time now, despite my self-admitted lack of interest in them. And I figured I'd start with White Star by James N. Spahn. White Star, white box science fiction role-playing, is an RPG based on the retro clone Swords and Wizardry white box, retooled for a sci-fi setting. As such, those who are familiar with Swords and Wizardry will find a number of similarities between the two. In fact, the two systems are compatible to the point where you can use some Swords and Wizardry monsters directly as aliens or other challenges for White Star, which can very much expand options while populating strange worlds, especially considering the number of creature supplements available for Swords and Wizardry. White Star has been out for a few years now, around 2015, and is available as both a PDF and print on demand through RPG Now. It is on a pay-what-you-want basis, which includes, to a degree, the print-on-demand version. For the PDF, it's pretty much whatever you wish, although there is a minimum on each of the print versions in order to cover the print costs. I don't actually have the print-on-demand version, so I'll be focusing on the PDF version for now and the actual contents of the game in this review. The PDF clocks in at 132 pages with a full color cover and black and white interior layout and art. We'll deal with the actual content in a moment as usual, but mechanically the layout is clear and easy to read. Single column for the most part, with the occasional dark box for optional material sidebars, interspersed with a few illustrations and tables where necessary. Fonts chosen are relatively large and easy to read, which is excellent when trying to read an electronic version, and honestly not all that common amongst sci-fi RPGs that usually try to pick some sort of atrocious technical font. I have to give props to the layout artist, as the various section headers and subheaders are quite easy to make out, which is not at all a guaranteed thing, again, if you've watched many of my reviews. The PDF itself is fully bookmarked and easy to navigate, another thing that isn't a guarantee in some products. The copy itself is well written, although there are some typographical errors scattered throughout, usually not enough to really be distracting, but there's at least one instance where I'm not entirely sure if a particular thing is a typo or meant to be a particular number as a result. Now on to the actual contents. The general theme of White Star is sci-fi, and it can cover a wide range of it, but the game is especially suited for space opera style games. It is, however, rules light enough to cover much, much more. I'll get into the specific overview shortly, but one thing that should be noted immediately is that, while a broad range of popular sci-fi works are hinted at or spoofed, one series in particular will immediately stand out as an obvious major inspiration throughout the entire game. The overall book is split into 12 chapters, 7 of which are for the players, while the remainder are for the referee. The first 7 chapters include all of the information that you'll need to create characters and actually run the game, while the final chapters include sample monsters and advanced equipment, as well as examples of different campaign types, and a sample campaign and adventure just to go ahead and show you how they're laid out. The contents start with an introduction as usual, although this one focuses more on the space opera genre White Star represents, rather than any general role-playing introduction. Indeed, even moving into Chapter 1, White Star lacks that by-now-rote general introduction to role-playing games, and I have to actually applaud that. Instead, there's simply a mention of Rule 1, similar to Rule 0 elsewhere, wherein it simply states that the referee has the right to modify the rules. In a rules-light system such as White Star, this is very important, because a lot of the system is presented as a framework which is intentionally loose to allow for customization and expansion by the individual referee. After this, it dives directly into character creation. White Star uses what I have come to call the classic 6 ability scores of Strength, Intelligence, Wisdom, Dexterity, Constitution, and Charisma. The standard method is to roll 3d6 and assign them down the line, although a sidebar does mention allowing assignment as the player wishes. Like most retro games based on the earliest editions of D&D, ability scores have minimal impact. Indeed, the very idea of allowing even a couple of classes to have strength impact their 2-hit and damage rolls is an optional rule. There is a pretty universal ability modifier spread with only 3 tiers, a -1, no modification, and a +1 tier, But aside from that, most of the abilities affect what you'd expect from other D20 and D&D based systems. There are flat bonuses to experience that can be gained for wisdom and charisma in addition to your character's prime requisite, which can stack up to a total of plus 15%. All in all, this character creation method is almost identical to the Swords and Wizardry white box rules and should be well familiar to anybody who plays retro clones in general. The primary differences in character creation are in the classes, which we'll get to in a moment. There's also differences in the alignment system. There's no set alignment, although the referee is encouraged to set their own alignments as appropriate to the genre their game is based on. I think this is actually a good adaptation, since it might allow less focus on the law-chaos issues that classic Swords and Wizardry and Swords and Sorcery games tend to highlight, and instead provide other cosmic alignment battles, light side versus dark side, for instance. And then there's the classes and the races, with most classes being considered human only, and then the races treated as their own classes. The human classes have a level progression mapped out to number 10, while non-human classes generally have much lower limits. Classes generally follow the format of Swords and Wizardry classes, with level progression laid out in terms of experience required, total hit dice, base to hit bonus, and a single saving throw number. On top of this, classes have weapon and armor restrictions, a prime requisite, and associated experience bonus, a few possible saving throw modifications for certain classes, and then a few class-specific abilities. The classes are the Aristocrat, which is a sort of planetary leader / party face with a few bard-like abilities, the Mercenary, who is the basic fighting class, Pilots, who are scoundrelous rogues whose focus is on flying spaceships, and the so-called Star Knight, which is a mystic warrior who can use certain supernatural meditation effects and fight with star swords made of energy. Character races are effectively the demi-human races of this game, and White Star does the referee a favor by not actually defining their exact appearance and exact traits, but rather allowing it for customization depending on the referee's own game. Instead, the character races are simply archetypes with shared powers. The Alien Brute is similar to the Mercenary, but with a few additional abilities. The Alien Mystic uses a strange, almost magical force to manifest certain effects, and finally robots are customizable mechanical characters that can specialize in one particular set of tasks. Indeed, the robots kind of differ from most of the demi-human races I see in fantasy as well as other sci-fi stuff, simply because they are treated as purely mechanical in nature, and then a lot of their abilities are selected from entire modules. The next chapter covers the standard costs and effects of various equipment and gear, and goes one further than a lot of retro clones in actually describing what set gear might be, although White Star does still leave it open-ended enough to modify for a particular game. Interestingly, weapons and armor range from the expected futuristic energy weapons and spacesuits all the way back to primitive swords and armor, allowing for a mix of tech levels to enter into the game. There is a discussion of armor class in this chapter as well, which uses much of the same dual number system of both armor class and ascending armor class present in many Swords and Wizardry products and derivatives. This is followed by a chapter detailing the rules of the game, from time passage to the basic single number saving throw mechanic, movement rate, and so on. Experience is handled as it is in many OSR games, with experience gained for collection of treasure as well as for defeating monsters. Hirelings, called assistants in this game, are detailed by hiring cost, which includes the idea of characters having access to a retinue of assistants and other followers as a base part of the game. Personal combat has its own chapter, and generally follows the methods that you'd be familiar with if you've played any sort of early edition retro clone, especially the Swords and Wizardry ones. However, a few things are notable. Modern and futuristic weapons are handled simply as ancient ones are, just with different damage radius, and they do streamline and simplify the phases a bit, so it boils down to a simple contest of d6s for initiative, and then the party that wins goes. Then the party that loses goes. If they tie, everybody goes at once. Results aren't actually figured out until the end of the round, so it's entirely possible to either overkill one target or for both groups to simultaneously kill one another. Attacks are simply d20s plus modifiers, and hits based on the result of the modified dice roll versus the ascending AC, or via a lookup table for normal AC. One thing that I do note is that there's no built-in rules for surprise, which I guess is of benefit when you're dealing with weapons that can be as lethal as the ones that they are in White Star. Another thing to note about combat in White Star is that there's no easy way built into the classes for one character to heal another. Oh yes, there is a healing meditation given to a Star Knight, but they don't get it until very much later in the game. So most healing is either going to be done naturally or via equipment. On the one hand, this is good for a group that prepares such equipment beforehand, but on the other it can make combat that much more deadly if no opportunity is given to use such equipment. The next chapter deals with starship combat, and generally running a starship. And honestly, it conforms strongly to the personal combat rules, except that there's this idea that combat is done via ship weapons, and that the ship has a single hit point total versus the party each having their own individual hit points. Movement is also abstracted somewhat, so that different ship drives can be adjusted to what is reasonable for the setting's technology level. The repair and care of starships and the hiring of crew and such is dealt with here too, as well as the individual ship type statistics and modifications that can be purchased for each ship. I find this section is a little bit on the light side for me, but then if I'm playing a sci-fi game, which I usually don't, but if I am, I tend to favor ship-to-ship combat that is more detailed and has more complexity than White Star offers, or honestly even should offer, considering it's supposed to be a rules-light game. For the rules-light fan, however, the rules really will get the job done and are complete enough to run a variety of different epic ship battles. The next chapter, the last available to players, covers the Star Knight meditations and alien mystic gifts, basically the spells of White Star. They follow the same format in general as Swords and Wizardry style spell write-ups, with Star Knights getting 5 levels of meditation and Mystics getting 3 levels of gifts. Generally speaking, however, the names and themes do not follow what you would expect of fantasy spells, although there are a number of direct translations. Star Knight meditations tend to focus on personal effects or subtle offense rather than the flashy damaging spells of other fantasy games, and a few seem directly designed to mimic abilities exhibited by a certain order of knights engaged in wars amongst the stars. Alien Mystics have a more limited gift set, and they include a few that create actual visible effects, although these tend to focus less on direct damage than fantasy spells do and more on influencing spells. The referee chapters start off with a list of creatures, aliens, and so forth, which don't actually contain a whole lot of different creatures, but they do give a decent range of usable opponents to throw into most adventures, while offering good examples of how to convert things to this system. The creatures in this section are statted similarly to, you guessed it, Swords and Wizardry, with stat blocks containing just the AC, hit dice, total to hit, attack types and damage, saving throw number, any special abilities they may have, movement rate, and experience. They also have a hit die equivalent, which functions as a sort of challenge rating guide for encounter building. These stat blocks are followed by a description of the monster and its abilities, which may be as simple as a couple sentences just describing the overall look, or go into detail on their various tactics and their backgrounds. Looking at the creatures, a significant number of them will be familiar to fans of various sci-fi shows and media, since many of them have simply had minor alterations and a name swap and then been dropped right in. For instance, there are the Void Knights, which are darker Star Knights, or Canics, which are cylindrical robot beings bent on galactic domination that often repeat the phrase "obliterate" in a harsh metallic voice. The list goes on, and as corny as it may seem, it's actually a pretty decent guide when you're using it to convert other sci-fi creatures that you may be inspired by. Further, the general compatibility with Swords and Wizardry monsters, as I mentioned before, means that the vast library of Swords and Wizardry monsters out there can be dumped directly into this game. The next chapter, and the final one before getting into the pure example chapters, is Advanced Equipment. Because a sci-fi game necessarily doesn't have magic items, this one instead has advanced technologies, which makes sense since a technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. It includes a rudimentary cybernetic implant system for those who like that in their game. Honestly, out of everything in this chapter, I just like the Atomizer, since it's basically Marvin Martian's ray gun, and anyone who's watched my playthrough of Fallout 1 knows how much amusement I got out of the one in there. The final 3 chapters of the book are what I'd call example chapters, so I'll probably just skim over them. There is a campaign chapter that gives campaign ideas and leads, as well as a notes on compatibility with the Swords and Wizardry white box. The next chapter maps out an entire interstellar sector, and can be used either as is or as a guideline for mapping out your own. And then finally there's a sample adventure, which is geared towards characters of 1st to 3rd level. It's pretty standard content, all in all, for your all-in-one style RPG. So what do I think about the system? Well, my longtime viewers will know that sci-fi games aren't usually my bag, as I've said a couple times previously in this very review. However, the rules-light nature of White Star, combined with the fact that it is based on a system that, for me at least, is already very familiar, did make it easy for me to follow and enjoy. Although it is designed to be open to most sci-fi genres, the particular feel of it very much replicates the space opera side of the genre, and it gives it a completely different kind of look in just the basic presentation than another certain OSR sci-fi game I intend to review very soon. Further, the new array of classes and races make it feel more than just D&D in space, while still retaining that OSR look. Now, I'm on record that I think one of the basic strengths of the Swords and Wizardry system and the games that derive from it is in the speed of play, and White Star keeps that at its core. The compatibility, as I keep mentioning, may allow you to use a large number of existing material beyond just monsters to flesh out your alien encounters, as well as to easily teach the game to people who may have only been exposed to various D&D products. The brevity of the rules are probably going to be a selling point to a lot of people, although as I stated in the ship combat section, I actually prefer more complex rules for modeling the sorts of grand and epic vehicle versus vehicle based combats that you might see a lot of in a sci-fi game, but that's just personal preference. Likewise, I prefer a grittier style overall than space opera when I play it. Again, your personal preference is probably going to play a strong part in whether you find this system of interest or not. All in all, though, it's a pretty nice little system, and I've got no qualms recommending it to OSR fans that are looking to get their space opera style gaming on. I'll put a link to where you can buy the PDF below, and remember that it does have a print-on-demand version. And I will look at some point into reviewing other sci-fi RPGs that I've been looking at. For now, this has been the RPG Crawler with a Shelf of Many Things. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. If you're feeling particularly generous, I do have a Patreon at patreon.com/rpgcrawler. Until next time, take care and goodbye.